And I'm honored to be here today and to see so many friends. And being in this town where I spent time in Congress and in the administration brings back a flood of memories to me. And I've had an unusual path in life, going from the farm in Gravett to the United States Congress, and then going into the administration. And probably because of my background as a U.S. attorney, I had opportunities in the administration that was unique to me. And I'll never forget whenever post 9/11, I went over to Homeland Security. And of course, we go to the Nebraska Avenue facility. Secretary Ridge is there. And by the way, every day I go into work with Secretary Ridge, he said, "Asa, being governor is the best job in America." And I took him seriously from that. But my first day on the job at Homeland Security, being the first undersecretary there with a new department, my operations guy comes to me and he said, "Mr. Secretary, there's been a plane hijacked in Cuba headed toward the airspace of the United States. We don't know whether it has hostile intent. What action do you want me to take?" Now, I'm a farm boy, I'm a lawyer, I've been in Congress. Nothing trained me to answer that question. And I leave people hanging because there actually is an answer to that question. We addressed it. But the point of the story is, in positions like that, you learn leadership, you learn solving problems, you learn to ask the right questions. And that's what a governor does. And as governor, I've enjoyed the problem solving, the leadership aspect. And my experience has helped me to do that. Bill McBride is here, and I'm really proud of the work that he's done. We've been a great team. We had the NGA meeting, less than 10 days ago. A great, successful meeting, had all the governors there, and it's sort of the last bastion of potential bipartisanship. And it's neat to see the governors there and talking about problems that we have in common and how we can address those together. And we share ideas, whether Democrat or Republican. And I thought I was a little bit bold, and I was bold. Whenever I met with the president, I said, "Well, Mr. President, there's a bipartisan consensus that we need to move out of this pandemic, move away from restrictions, move into management of it." And since we said that, and I made that appeal to the media, and Governor Murphy actually backed me up in it, which I was pleased with. Well, the next week, Governor Murphy announced they're lifting all the statewide mandate. New York announced that. So, hey, that's a good example of having an influence the NGA, perhaps. I'll take credit for it. But we are moving in that direction, and I'm delighted with that success. French mentioned some of the economic successes in Arkansas. And as governor, you got to talk about your state. But he mentioned that we had the announcement of U.S. Steel out of Pittsburgh, the old historic company, announced a $3 billion investment, which is the largest economic investment in Arkansas history. We competed with other states. We won that because of our workforce, because of our incentive package, because of the access that we have on the Mississippi River, and all of those ingredients. And now Arkansas will have a county, when in full production, will be the largest steel producing county in the United States of America. So don't forget, Arkansas Steel bound together, and that is 900 jobs with an average wage rate of $100,000. And that's extraordinary for the Delta, for Eastern Arkansas. Big success story that we had yesterday. Whenever I mentioned we had our NGA meeting, we took up a couple different topics there of focus. One of them was my national initiative as chairman of the National Governor Association is computer science education, because Arkansas was the first state to mandate all the schools to offer computer science. We went from 1,100 students taking computer science in Arkansas when I became governor to over 12,500 taking computer science in Arkansas. And then we took it a step further. In this last legislative session, we were the third state to mandate it as a graduation credit. To graduate from Arkansas schools now, you have to have computer science. Now, it can be a math, it could be a science credit, but this is an extraordinary step forward, recognizing that teaching our young people the opportunities in software development and cybersecurity, and that these are good paying jobs, allows us to bring technology companies to Arkansas. It allows us to feed the incredible entrepreneurial spirit and technology that we already have, from Sam Walton and Walmart, which is a technology company, to U.S. Steel, which is a technology company that happens to make steel. And we have to produce that talent. We're doing that, and I took that issue nationally and asking governors to form a compact to help promote that in all the different states. We also, as I mentioned, talked about moving out of the pandemic, which had bipartisan support. And the third thing that we talked about was simply bipartisan leadership. And as we looked at the panel that we wanted to have on bipartisan leadership, we asked David Rubenstein, formerly of the Carlisle Group, to moderate it. Did a masterful job. And then it was Governor Murphy, a Democrat, and myself were on the panel, and all the governors were included in the conversation. But David Rubenstein is really a great interviewer. So the first question he asked me, well, Governor Hutchinson, what's so bad about partisanship? Great way to start out the conversation on bipartisanship, to ask me about partisanship. And it's a great question. And I look back in my history, and I'm as partisan as anyone. I was chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas, and when we were an extreme minority, and I helped build the Republican Party where it's a red state today. So I'm partisan in my elections. But I also believe that once the election is over, you've got to solve problems. And to solve problems, you've got to reach across the aisle. And that, to me, is a pattern that leadership needs to follow today. And if you look at the United States of America, we have a lot of needs. Sure, we've got to have improved border security. We've got to address the issues of inflation. Whenever you look at trade policy, I came up in the era of Ronald Reagan, whenever the hallmark principle of the Republican Party was we ought to open markets, not close markets. I still happen to believe that is a good philosophy that we should have, but we've drifted away from that. Whenever you look at the challenges in Europe, the challenges in China, we have these problems to address, and leadership makes a difference in how you approach those. And that's where you set aside partisanship and you work together to get that done. Obviously, you don't abandon principles. You stick with your principles, but you find common ground. And to me, thoughtful, conservative leadership is important today in America. And sort of the gnat flying around in the room, perhaps, is the front page story today in the Washington Post that the RNC resolution of this last week, which was a censure of 2 members of Congress, we had some leadership that spoke out against that. I've been a former party chairman, and that's not the job of the party, first of all. And then secondly, we have to be about the future. We have to be about addressing these problems and not the past. And so I was one of the few governors that spoke out on that. I said this was wrong. It is not building a party, but it is looking at the past. I believe that genuinely, and I think it's going to be more challenging for our party looking into the future to win in 2022, that we have to be able to articulate our vision for the future, but also we have to be able to stand for the rule of law, and we have to make sure that we do not diminish that by that type of resolution that diminishes what happens on January 6th. And so we're going to have to continue to address that as a party and as leaders today. Whenever you look, though, at where we've come, I have to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we've done in Arkansas before I turn it open to questions. I'm very proud of the fact that when I became governor, we had a 7% individual income tax rate in Arkansas. I'm not proud of that, but I'm proud of what we did about it. And that was we started reducing that. Everybody said, well, you can't do that. You're going to be not have enough money to provide essential services. They were wrong. We lowered that tax from 7% down to 5.9%, and we're going to be lowering it the next 2 years to 4.9%. And at the same time, we lowered the taxes. We grew our economy, which is a fundamental principle of handling lowering taxes through the growth. And when I became governor, for 100 years of Democrat leadership, they simply forecasted what the revenue was going to be for this next year, and then they would budget to spend every dime of it. That was the practice in state government. We balanced the budget, but for 100 years we spent everything that came in. I said, why can't we create savings? And we started that practice, and now we have equivalent of 20% of our state budget that's in a reserve account now, $1.2 billion. Lower taxes, set up that reserve account, creating the surplus, creating jobs in the state, leading in education, computer science education, and we've managed through the pandemic and kept our economy going and respecting the public health needs, but also the individual freedom needs of our citizens. I think we've done a good job in Arkansas. And I'll close before I turn it over to questions by just referencing one of the great honors that I had as a young United States attorney. As French mentioned, I was age 31. I was the youngest in the United States at the time. Ronald Reagan appointed me. And toward the end, whenever I resigned, I ran for office, and I got the occasion for the first time to be with President Reagan in the Oval Office. And I went to the Oval Office, and of course, the first time you're there, you just try to observe everything. And so I got to see on his desk the plaque that said, "It can be done." And that was his belief in government, belief in individual liberty and freedom. We can balance those. It can be done. And it was an incredible occasion then. But Ronald Reagan has always been someone at a high level, as a mentor, as someone that I've admired. And I want to share 3 characteristics of leadership that he had that I think is so vitally needed today. One of them is that he was a consistent conservative. He lost in 1976. 4 years later, he came back and won, but he was the same person, a consistent conservative. And I value that. I believe if you look at my governance, it's been a consistent conservative. And secondly, though, he was pragmatic. And oh, how we need a little bit more pragmatism today. He was willing to work with Tip O'Neill. He understood that if you get 80% of your agenda, it's a victory, not a loss. And he worked with others to get that done. Of course, he said, we'll come back later and get the other 20%. But he was pragmatic in his philosophy. And then the last thing, which is probably the most important need that we have today, is he was an optimist about America. He believed in our future. He always believed that we could rise to the occasion and solve problems. And so that's the kind of leadership that I think we need today to address the problems of trade, to address all the problems that we face through strength and through freedom and through pragmatism and through leading with principle and conviction. Thank you for standing here and being here and allowing me to address this today. Thank you.
Governor, great opening remarks. French Hill, you did such a wonderful job with that introduction. I feel sorry for tomorrow's introducer. You get the first question.
Thank you, Jim. Governor, thanks for being here today. Thanks for being here today and sharing your views. It's really great to have you back at the Capitol Hill Club, a place that you're no stranger. My question is, last week, I think America really looked with interest at Johns Hopkins' announcement on the cost benefit of total lockdowns. And one of your leadership strategies was to do the best you could, follow CDC guidance, be aware of it. But at the same time, 80% of our kids were in school last school year. Our tax revenues were up. We had people employed. I'd like you to reflect on, looking back now over 24 months, how you balance that, because Arkansas effectively was not locked down. Everyone who lives here in the Beltway still doesn't have kids in school. So yield to you for that, because I think Johns Hopkins now has provided data that was borne out, frankly, by the good work in Arkansas and some other places.
Thanks, French. Let's reflect back for a moment. In March of 2020 is when that first case came. We declared an emergency. And, the science, the data, the information flow has been different at different times. But you look at that time frame, there was fear, there was anxiety, and there was pressure, and so there was shutdown. And we did close our school, went virtual, I should say. We went virtual from March until into spring. We never closed down our businesses. We never had a shelter in place. We never did do that because it never made any sense to me because we're still going to have movement in the different sectors. And that was one of the best decisions I made. And we kept our economy moving from day one. We had protective measures in place, but day one all the way through, we never shut down our economy. But in terms of the schools, I recognize in that 3-month period there, or 2-month period that we went virtual, this cannot happen again. And so that spring, I said, next year, we're open in classroom instruction, and it's going to be statewide, and every school's got to provide that in classroom instruction. And that consistency, that determination, that message worked. Even though in that fall, you remember, that's when we got hit hard again, and there was pressure, and the unions and others were saying, close it down, close it down. We never did. We kept it open. And so that was a good decision because, as John Hopkins and others are articulating now, the difficulty in terms of the mental health of our students and the athletes when you're closed down, it's hard to make that gap up. And so I'm glad we kept them open, and we started and we kept at it. As governor, I am looking forward, and I think it's very important for our nation to have a thoughtful study. John Hopkins' study is a part of it, but it's a broad study as to what we did right and what we did wrong. There'll be some measuring sticks that says I did something wrong, but I think they'll see a lot of things we got right. But we have to learn from this, and you're going to have to review it comprehensively because we took some wrong turns during the last 2 years, and hope we don't make those mistakes again.
This has been a great presentation so far, and I think we have a long history of always having great leaders coming out of the states. And I was thinking back to the 90s when we went through a similar exercise to get the majority, and we had the contract with America, something that Leader McCarthy is going through now, and I was talking to French Hill about a little while ago. One of the big things back then was we looked to the governors for great ideas, and back then it was welfare reform. And ended up sending it to the president's desk. Some former governor from Arkansas, I think, ended up signing it, if I recall my history. And I'm curious. We're going through this exercise right now, and a lot of this should be done with the states and with governors. And can you think of 2 or 3 issues that you think the House and potentially even Senate Republicans could work with, not just Republican governors, but all governors, that could be things that we could get done that is a real true partnership between Congress and the states? Curious if you have any ideas of that on that. Thank you.
Well, I should yield that question to Congressman Hill because he's right in the middle of that, and you know, many of the bills that are coming out that helps us to address the supply chain issues, and you know, to me that is whenever you look at the Contract of America, it did 2 things. It gave us a set of goals, objectives, concrete ideas that we were presenting the American public, but it also defined our difference with the other side. And so that's always important during an election season. But in terms of ideas coming out of the states, I mean, first of all, we have got to address our supply chain, and we have to increase our independence on where our medical products are coming from. You know, we have Walmart here, and I've talked to Walmart, and if you want to move from China as a supply chain source, it might take 6 years to move that. And so we've got some challenges there, but I think that's something that we need to address. And you start with the priorities, but you increase the manufacturing of goods here in the United States of America. And I think that's something that we've got to push, and I know Congress is looking at that competitive issue, but that's something that the governors are interested in working on. You know, from a governor's standpoint, this is a rule of law issue. You look at it's startling, you know, how just think about our allies across the seas, look at the United States of America and see smash and grab in the stores. That's not America. That's not the rule of law that made our country great. And so I think the criminal justice issues, addressing the crime issues is critically important, and that's uniquely state and federal working together. It's primarily state, but we can have some federal guidance in that. We have got to do better in reinforcing the concept of that rule of law and respect for the law here in the United States. And it starts with addressing the problem of crime.
Thank you, Governor. You mentioned it may take a few years to get our party back in terms of on track with a sort of free trade agenda. Keying off that and what you were just talking about, then it seems like our party's drifted on a number of issues recently, focusing on sort of minor ones as opposed to what we built our success on. How do we get our party back on track?
Well, first of all, we're in a great position. We've raised money. We've got great candidates that are out there. I think we're set for a great fall election, and much of that is because of a disappointment in the current leadership. And you could recite the concerns that the average American has. And we talked about our young people. I think they look at the border and it doesn't make sense to them. Whenever you look at the rising cost of the products that they have, they know that has to be something that's addressed. When you look at our pullout from Afghanistan, that's not a source of pride for America. And so we're in a really good position. But we have to really, whether it's a contract for America or whether it's a set of ideas or principles, we've got to offer that and really just spend more time talking about the future and our ideas versus the past. That is just the fundamental point. We win when we do that, and we do that with a spirit of optimism and a smile on our face, and people respond to that message. Americans are incredible. They take adversity. They've taken the pandemic. We marched through that. There is a spirit of optimism in America. We just have to tap into it.